This is the summer job gangster movie. The people that are half-assing it, they don't really care or know why they're doing it, they're not good at it, and they mess up all the time. Like the McDonald's worker of gangster. That's what this movie is. Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a director and editor living in Taiwan, and today I'm going to be talking about the film Dust of Angels from 1992. Dust of Angels is a gangster movie that was made in Taiwan, and it follows two hot-headed young men who live in rural Taiwan and get involved in gangs and crime at the lowest level. They're drivers, errand boys for the bosses, and they have no real power. And they get caught up in this world of gangs and eventually throw their life away by pissing off the wrong people. The first thing that struck me with this movie is that unlike other mafia movies, there's no real effort made to get the audience to understand the structure of the gang or the dynamic of the gang warfare, the beef that's happening, who's mad at who. It's pretty hard to follow. It's honestly even pretty hard to even really know what the gangs are doing, like how they're making money. You kind of are under the assumption that they're selling weapons and drugs in some form, but they don't really get into the workings of the gang like a lot of other crime or mafia movies do. This movie is really just people wandering around, getting into fights, deciding to kill each other. The plot of the movie is not really the point of the movie. I would say this movie is more grounded in the characterization of the two boys and the mafia leader that kind of introduces them into the organization, as well as their parents and the people around them. It's more about character than plot, I would say. The boys themselves are so obsessed with their masculinity and just kind of rudderless. They do drugs, they get into fights over nothing, and they're very obsessed with kind of proving that they're tough and strong in the most childish way that you can. They make all the wrong decisions throughout this film. And that's the thread that you follow, following them and kind of seeing how they continue to screw up and do the stupidest thing they could do in whatever situation they're in. I think the other thing that keeps this movie entertaining and interesting is just that it has a really cool vibe. The 4K restoration of this movie is beautiful. Like the neon colors of Taiwan at night. You could just stare at this movie all day and that's kind of enough. Watching the lights and people driving, or a single shot of a city street that it just holds and people walk down. I would say it maybe has some of the best cinematography of any gangster movie. It's beautifully shot, beautifully framed, and the restoration of it is amazing. And continuing on with this idea of vibes, the music in this movie is also really freaking cool. It uses the rock music of this Taiwanese artist called Wu Bai, and it's just this 90s rock that's all sung in Taiwanese, and it permeates this film in a way that matches the tone really well. It's a perfect use of rock music in a movie. I would say, again, cooler than using the Rolling Stones like Scorsese always does. Like, this is very unique vibe and tone, especially if you aren't super familiar with Taiwan. There's a lot of new cool stuff that you can discover by watching this film. You can see some interesting landscapes that maybe you haven't seen before. You can hear some interesting music in a language that maybe you haven't heard before. So I would definitely recommend checking it out and just trying to get into the mindset of these people. It does a really good job of doing that. Beyond that, even though the plot of this movie isn't that clear, I think the themes are. So while we don't get the process and the inner workings of the crime organization like we would in a Scorsese movie, there's something very interesting about that. We're kept at a very low level. We really get to analyze these characters that are on the lowest rung of the crime organization. This idea of this disposable kind of henchman. Who is this person? It's a young kid that has no direction in their life, and they're basically being used by this crime organization to do all of the things that kind of keep the business running, like driving the car or you know, taking someone somewhere, or holding the weapon and taking the fall for the crime. I read an interesting review that said that all gangster movies are about commerce and actually about how we glorify capitalism. So the reason that our society glorifies this gangster culture is because gangster culture is so similar to capitalist culture. So we feel trapped in it. It often leads us to ruin. It's destructive to ourselves and to the people around us. And it doesn't fulfill us, even though it promises that it will. And a lot of times we delude ourselves into thinking that it does. So these are some similarities between the two things that I think most of the time when we're making a gangster movie, that is what the director is getting at. He's trying to show us this culture that we have, all of us have. The gangster is the most extreme example of our culture. It's our culture taken to the furthest extent. So while most gangster movies are about the high-level mob people, like the people that make it to the top, so you become the king capitalist, right? Or they're sometimes also about mid-level mob people that are like very good at what they do. They're the most skilled murderer or the most skilled money launderer. This movie is about the summer job. This is the summer job gangster movie. The people that are half-assing it, they don't really care or know why they're doing it. They're not good at it, and they mess up all the time. Like the McDonald's worker of gangster. That's what this movie is. And watching that, we get some really interesting depictions of how stupid and reckless young men are. Everything they do in this movie, as you watch it, you're just thinking to yourself, holy crap, these guys are dumb. These men constantly need to prove their masculinity, and they do it with no thought of the consequences. And I appreciated that depiction. I appreciated that this is a gangster movie that truly, in no way, glorifies being a gangster. It really, as you watch it, you really don't want to be these guys. And I think it does that in a way that Scorsese movies don't. A lot of gangster movies kind of give lip service to the idea that, oh yeah, being a mobster is bad, but ultimately the reality of a Scorsese movie or many gangster movies is that they are trying to make being a mobster look cool. This movie truly does not make being a gangster look cool. It makes it look pretty stupid. This movie is still cool though. That's what's interesting about it, is the cool things about this movie are the imagery and the music. So reality, when you watch this movie, you're probably more likely to want to become a street photographer or a musician than want to become a gangster, which is a very, I think, an interesting feat, to make a cool movie where the main characters are very uncool. This movie probably isn't for everyone. I think if the theme of toxic masculinity and kind of showing it and dissecting it is something that is boring to you, then you won't enjoy this movie. I read some other criticisms of it that said that, you know, the female characters in this film are only secretaries. And I think that that's a valid reason to not want to watch this, because this movie is really only showing the toxic side of young men, toxic side of crime, and it may be something that you don't really need to watch, because there are a lot of movies about this topic. I mean, I would say the majority of movies are about this topic. So it covers themes that you've probably already seen, and I think if you're interested in other things, then you might not find this movie particularly interesting. But for me personally, I do think it covers what it would mean to be a low-level gangster in an honest and interesting and way that I had never seen before, and in a way that many other gangster movies kind of gloss over. The imagery and the tone and the vibe and all that stuff all felt very unique and interesting to me in a way that I enjoyed. I would say this movie probably has less in common with Scorsese and like mafia, Italian mafia movies, and more in the vein of something like Boys in the Hood or the movie Baby Boy, which is showing young men who are not very powerful, crushed under the weight of the situation that are in, and feeling that they need to move to crime to be fulfilled or to save themselves. Something that's interesting and something that I always talk about is how Taiwanese New Wave movies often focus on the existential feeling of meaninglessness that people have in Taiwan. So they're not about survival, they're about feeling hopeless. So unlike a movie like Boys in the Hood, where the characters are forced into crime in order to survive, This is like the reason that they have to do it. They have no choice. Well, in this Taiwanese new wave gangster movie, the characters aren't forced into crime for survival. They do it because they're trying to find meaning and they feel rudderless and meaningless. And it's a sad thing that the culture teaches these young men that shooting guns and getting into fights at the pool hall is what's going to give them meaning. So that is the real tragedy of this. It's not that they're in a situation that they can't escape. It's that they're in a situation that they can escape, but society and their own kind of warped thoughts make them feel like they should do it and that they want to do it, even though it's such a dangerous path to go down. Yeah, I mean, one of the characters even is constantly mentioned that he has the ability to move to America. And instead of doing that, he chooses to hang around with his loser friend and like shoot people for fun. That is the tragedy of the film, the hopelessness of youth, the youth that feels like they need to engage in all this destructive behavior when the reality is they just don't have to. Watching it as an adult, you really understand that. I wonder if I had seen this as a kid, if I would have identified with them more. I don't think so, though. I think it's pretty easy to recognize that these guys are screw-ups. And that is, I think, what makes the movie good. Let me know what you thought if you've seen this movie. If you haven't, I highly recommend it just for the imagery alone. The 4K restoration that was recently done is gorgeous. The colors are amazing. If you love cinematography, this is a movie for you to watch. Also music. Listen to the music. I think it's got a great soundtrack. Very fun movie. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and please tell your friends about Volcano. All right, see you guys next time.